The midday sun scorched the dusty town square, baking the wooden boards of the boardwalks and casting sharp shadows against the adobe walls. Clara Whitmore, barely 28, stood at the center, her hands trembling as coarse ropes bit into her wrists. The crowd pressed close, a living wall of suspicion and greed. Men in weathered hats spat into the dust, their boots scraping with impatience, while women murmured among themselves, their eyes darting from Clara to the noose that swung ominously above her. She tried to swallow the lump in her throat, but the dryness in her mouth made each swallow a small agony. Her gaze flicked to the gang leader, Sheriff Mallory, a gaunt man of 40 with a hawkish nose and eyes that gleamed with cruel satisfaction. "The land's hers no longer," he barked. "The town decides." The words cut through her like a whip, but Clara's chin lifted despite the fear twisting in her chest. She remembered her husband, James, who had died only months ago from a fever that swept through their homestead, leaving her alone to guard the property that everyone else seemed to want. The thought of losing it now, her only link to him, made her chest tighten with helpless rage. A sudden gust of wind lifted the dust around her feet. Clara's mind raced, desperate for a plan, though there was none. She could feel the eyes of every onlooker, each weighing her worth and her fortune. Her thoughts strayed to Daniel Carter, her first love, the boy she had run from after a fight with her parents, the one who had left the territory years ago seeking fortune in distant towns. She hadn't heard a word of him since, yet some primal part of her whispered that he would return when she needed him most. A small flicker of hope stirred, but it was fragile, easily snuffed by the tension that thickened in the air. Clara's breath caught when the rope creaked above her head, the boards beneath her boots swaying slightly as a few men shifted impatiently. She forced her eyes upward, meeting Mallory's cold stare. The crowd quieted for a heartbeat, the air heavy with anticipation. One wrong move, one misstep, and it would be over. The faint whinny of a horse drew her attention to the edge of town, a shadow of movement on the horizon, but the glare of the sun made it impossible to discern who or what it might be. Earlier that morning, before Clara had been dragged to the gallows, she had overheard a gathering that chilled her more than a rope ever could. Hidden behind the corner of the general store, she had watched the town council meet in the dim, smoke-filled room, the flickering lanterns painting faces in harsh orange hues. Men in their 40s and 50s leaned over a rough wooden table, plotting the takeover of her land. Coins clinked and papers shuffled as greed dripped from their words like poison. "Whitmore's land could be ours if we move fast," muttered Thomas Reeves, a broad-shouldered cattle rancher of 39, his voice low but heavy with menace. "We can't let a widow hold what belongs to the town." Clara's heart pounded in her chest. She knew each name, each threat, and the weight of their combined greed. Her eyes stung from the smoke, but she forced herself to stay hidden, taking in every detail. The map spread across the table, the marked borders of her homestead, the way the men's eyes lit with the prospect of easy fortune. Her mind catalogued each weakness, each opportunity, though fear gnawed at her relentlessly. She thought of her husband, of the life they had built together, of the sacrifices she had made just to keep the farm standing after his death, and she felt the first real spark of defiance. The town might think her weak, a helpless widow, but they underestimated the fire that still burned within her. She tightened her fists and promised herself she would not go quietly, that if the time came, she would fight. The moment passed too quickly. A sudden call from the room startled her, and she melted back into the shadows, heart hammering. By the time she stepped back into the sunlight, the noose was waiting. The town conspiracy had reached its peak, and Clara had nowhere to turn, except, perhaps, toward the horizon where the faint outline of a rider moved against the sun. The gang arrived at her homestead that afternoon, horses stamping, dust swirling in chaotic clouds. Clara met them at the gate, her hands empty but her posture unyielding. Mallory dismounted first, spurs clanging, his eyes sharp as he studied her. "Step aside, Whitmore. We want nothing but what's owed." Clara's voice was steady, despite the fear clutching at her chest. "This land belongs to me." "I won't." "You won't what?" Mallory interrupted, stepping closer. His shadow fell across her face. "You'll step aside or hang, lady. Your choice." Her pulse raced. She could see the glint of rifles leaning against a nearby barn, the menacing curve of knives at belts. Yet in the corner of her eye, past the ridge of the homestead, a figure appeared, barely more than a shadow at first. A lone rider, silhouetted against the sun. Clara's breath hitched. She couldn't be sure, but something deep in her chest recognized the gait, the stance, the unmistakable confidence of a man who had once held her heart. "Who's that?" one of the men muttered, squinting. Clara didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her mind flashed back to Daniel, to the boy who had loved her and left for reasons neither of them fully understood. Now, grown, hardened by years, perhaps a man of 30 or so, he moved with a purpose she could almost sense from this distance. The gang hesitated. They were used to fear, to widows who cowered, but Clara did not. She squared her shoulders, drawing a line in the dirt with her boot, a silent signal that she would not be intimidated. Mallory's eyes narrowed, suspicion mixing with unease. Something in the air had changed. The balance of power shifted, though neither Clara nor the gang fully realized how. The rider spurred his horse, though he kept his distance, eyes fixed on Clara. The wind carried the faint sound of hooves over the dry earth. A tension coiled in the town like a snake, ready to strike. Clara clenched her jaw. The rope might have awaited her at the gallows that morning, but now, with hope stirring and a plan beginning to form, she felt the first real spark of control over her destiny. As the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the land, Clara knew the fight was far from over. Yet, for the first time since her husband's death, she felt not just fear, but something stronger, determination. And somewhere beyond the ridge, Daniel's return hinted at the storms yet to come. The wind howled across the dry plains as Clara Whitmore, 28, darted through the sparse trees surrounding her homestead. Dust clung to her long olive-green dress and worn leather boots, but she paid it no mind. Every heartbeat was a drum of terror and determination as she glanced behind her. Sheriff Mallory, 40, gaunt and relentless, spurred his horse with a cruel grin, and 4 gang members, 30 to 45, followed, rifles glinting in the late afternoon sun. Clara's breath came in ragged gasps. She knew the woods near the creek better than anyone. Every fallen log, every brushy thicket was a lifeline. She ducked low as one of the gangmen aimed his rifle, the shot ringing out, splintering the earth beside her. Panic surged, but she forced herself to run faster, scrambling over roots and rocks, heart hammering against her ribs. Her mind raced with memories of Daniel Carter, her first love, the man who had left town years ago and haunted her thoughts ever since. She imagined his steady hands and calm voice. She had to survive until he came, until some miraculous turn of fortune saved her. The wind tugged at her hair and tore at her clothes, and the cold creek water she plunged into felt like a brief baptism, a chance to vanish from their view. The gang yelled, spitting threats, but Clara's resolve hardened. Each step, each leap over the uneven ground, was a defiance, a refusal to be conquered. She didn't know if Daniel was anywhere near, but she clung to hope that the distant rider she had glimpsed days ago might yet appear. Night fell with a blanket of stars, the moon casting silver light over the rugged terrain. Clara crouched in a shallow cave near the creek, water dripping onto the rocks around her. Her dress was torn, boots muddy, hair tangled, but she was alive. Hunger gnawed at her, and the ache of exhaustion weighed heavy. Yet fear drove her fingers to gather sticks for a fire. She struck flint against steel, sparks dancing before a small flame flickered to life. The crackling fire warmed her hands as she scavenged wild roots and berries, tasting the sour tang of survival. Every rustle in the trees made her flinch. Every hoot of an owl felt like a warning. She reflected on her late husband, James, whose death had left her alone to fight a world that seemed to hunger for her destruction. Each hardship reminded her of the strength she had quietly nurtured, the courage she had yet to fully wield. She closed her eyes and allowed herself a brief memory of Daniel, imagining the man he had become. Somewhere beyond the horizon, perhaps he was returning, a storm of reckoning yet to arrive. The thought steadied her. For the first time since Mallory's gang had come to claim her land, Clara felt a flicker of confidence. She could endure, she could fight, and she could survive. As the fire crackled, shadows danced across the cave walls. echoing the battles she knew she would soon face. She checked her makeshift bow and arrows, the only weapon she had scavenged from the homestead. The wilderness was as much a foe as the men who sought her land, but it also offered sanctuary and cunning advantages. Clara whispered to herself, promising the night air that she would not falter. Dawn broke with a pale, cold light over the rolling plains. Clara stirred at the sound of distant hoofbeats, cautious and alert. She squinted toward the horizon, heart tightening. A rider approached, steady and calm, the silhouette unmistakable to her memory. Daniel Carter, 30 tall, broad-shouldered, short dark hair, rugged stubble, dressed in a faded brown coat, trousers, and boots, riding a strong brown horse. Her chest swelled with relief and disbelief. He was real. He had returned. As he drew closer, he slowed, scanning the area with sharp, calculating eyes. Clara stepped forward cautiously, recognizing the confidence and poise she had loved in her youth. "Daniel," she whispered, voice trembling. He dismounted, his movements precise, hands resting lightly on his rifle, eyes locking with hers. "Clara," he said, voice steady, rich with familiarity and command. "You're alive." His gaze softened, reading the exhaustion, fear, and stubborn defiance etched on her face. There was no time for reunion, though. The threat of Mallory and the gang still loomed. Together, they assessed the land around them, strategizing silently. Daniel had changed, hardened by years beyond her sight, but his instincts were sharp, his mind quick. Clara shared her knowledge of the terrain, her understanding of the gang's tendencies, and the weaknesses in their approach. Each plan, they whispered, carried weight. The air between them was taut with unspoken trust, and slowly, a sense of hope threaded through the tension. By midday, they moved cautiously toward a narrow ravine, where Clara had prepared traps and ambush points. The men who sought her land would find no easy prey here. Daniel's arrival, quiet but commanding, had transformed the fight from one of desperation to one of tactical advantage. Clara's heart swelled with a cautious optimism. They had survived the night, and now they had a chance, not just to endure, but to strike back. As the wind swept the canyon, carrying dust and the faint scent of pine, Clara realized she was no longer just a frightened widow. She was a fighter, and Daniel's return marked the beginning of a reckoning that would shake the town to its core. Every rustle, every shadow, every movement held potential danger, but also opportunity. They would reclaim what was hers, and together, they would write the next chapter of her story in blood and courage. The dawn broke with a faint, gray light over the town of Blackwater, dust rising from empty streets like ghostly specters. Clara Whitmore, 28, her dark brown hair tied back in dusty olive green dress torn from weeks in the wilderness, crouched behind a cart near the edge of town, pebbles crunching softly under her worn leather boots. Daniel Carter, 30 tall, broad-shouldered, short dark brown hair, rugged stubble, faded brown coat, riding a brown horse, surveyed the streets with sharp eyes, rifle resting lightly in his hands. Every shadow, every glint of metal on the rooftops, drew their attention. The town had changed little, yet every building, every alley seemed poised for danger. Clara's chest heaved with anticipation and fear. Today, the land that had been her husband's and now hers would either be reclaimed or lost forever. The memory of Mallory, 40, gaunt, hawkish nose, his cruel smirk, and the gangmen, 30 to 45, rugged faces, rifles at the ready, haunted her. Their greed had forced her into the wilderness, but now the tables had shifted. The silence in the streets was oppressive, each creaking board beneath Daniel's horse a warning. They moved cautiously, Daniel leading, Clara close behind, eyes scanning every doorway. "We'll need to draw them out," Daniel whispered, voice low and firm. "We can't risk a straight fight in the open." Clara nodded, recalling every trap she had set along the creek and ravines. She remembered the fear that had driven her through the wilderness and felt it transform into a sharp, purposeful resolve. The memory of her husband, James, gone too soon, mingled with the longing for justice. They reached the town square, where the gallows had stood empty, but the rope still swayed slightly, a silent testament to past threats. Daniel dismounted, moving silently behind the barrels and carts, signaling Clara to follow. Their eyes met, a brief flicker of understanding passing between them. They had survived the wilderness together, and now they were ready to reclaim what was hers. From the shadows, they watched as Mallory and his gang emerged from the saloon, counting coins, laughing quietly, unaware of the eyes watching them. Daniel's fingers brushed against the rifle stock, and Clara flexed her hands, recalling the archery she had practiced in the woods. The tension coiled tighter, each heartbeat echoing in the silent square. The wind tugged at Clara's dress, lifting it slightly, reminding her of the long path she had walked from despair to defiance. Every step they took was deliberate, every glance measured. Clara's mind replayed the cruelty, the conspiracies, the relentless pursuit. But now, for the first time in weeks, she felt in control, guided by skill, knowledge of the terrain, and Daniel's unwavering support. They were no longer prey. They were hunters. The first sign of trouble came from the far side of the square. A gang member, 32, spurred his horse toward a barricade, gun in hand, shouting a warning. Clara's fingers tightened around her bow. Arrow knocked. Daniel's voice was steady but commanding. Hold. Wait for the signal. Time stretched, tension snapping like a taut wire. And then the chaos began. The clash erupted with sudden violence. Gunfire split the morning air, echoing off wooden buildings, dust rising with every shot. Clara moved swiftly. Arrows fly with precision, striking rifles and forearms, disarming the gang one by one. Daniel advanced, rifle raised, eyes scanning, taking down threats with calculated efficiency. The sound of shattering wood and screaming men filled the square. Yet Clara felt a strange clarity amid the chaos. She remembered the terror in the town square weeks ago, the rope, the crowd, the inevitability of Mallory's cruelty, and let it fuel her now. Each movement was purposeful, each action a declaration that she would no longer be helpless. One gang member, 35, lunged toward her from a cart, knife raised. She sidestepped, letting her elbow connect with his chest, sending him sprawling. Another arrow found its mark in a man aiming at Daniel. Mallory, realizing his control was slipping, bellowed orders, but his voice trembled with fear now. Clara's eyes met his across the square. Rage, grief, and resolve burned in hers. He sneered, but it lacked conviction. His power had been an illusion, and she was about to tear it apart. Daniel joined her side, nodding subtly, eyes fierce and protective. Together, they became a seamless force, outmaneuvering the gang at every turn. The fight surged toward the saloon, barrels exploding, boards splintering, dust choking the air. Clara's mind raced. She thought of the long nights in the wilderness, the near drowning in the creek, the firelight flickering in the cave. Each memory a reminder of her survival and resilience. She would not falter now. Mallory made a desperate move, trying to flee through the alley behind the general store. Clara spotted him, bow raised. Daniel intercepted, rifle leveled. The gaunt sheriff rose, eyes wide with disbelief. Clara loosed her arrow. It struck the wall beside him, a warning shot that drove him to his knees. Daniel stepped forward, placing a firm hand on his shoulder, signaling surrender. The remaining gangmen, seeing their leader subdued, raised their hands. Some tried to flee, but Clara's sharp commands and Daniel's rifle kept them in line. The town square felt eerily silent, except for the heavy breathing of the combatants. Clara's chest heaved, adrenaline still coursing, yet a profound sense of victory settled over her. She had faced death, wilderness, and betrayal, and emerged not broken but unshakable. As the sun climbed higher, bathing the town in golden light, Clara walked among the subdued gang, reclaiming not just her land, but her dignity and power. Daniel remained at her side, steady, vigilant, yet the warmth of his gaze was unmistakable. They exchanged a glance that spoke volumes. Trust, partnership, and a shared history that no battle could erase. The townsfolk, once whispering of greed and conspiracies, emerged cautiously from their homes and shops. Some offered silent acknowledgement. Others averted their eyes, shamed by their complicity. Clara raised her chin, her voice firm yet calm. "This land is mine," she declared, "and justice has been served." Mallory, gaunt and defeated, was escorted to the edge of town, his arrogance replaced with fear. Daniel tightened his grip on the reins of his horse, eyes sweeping the streets for any further threat. But the danger had passed. The frontier, as unforgiving as it had been tamed, not by brutality, but by resilience, courage, and cunning. Clara walked the crest of the hill behind her homestead, surveying the plains, the wind tugging at her hair. The land was hers, yes, but more than that, it was a testament to endurance and spirit. She thought of James, of the past she could not reclaim, and Daniel, the future now possible. Her heart was heavy, yes, but also fierce, filled with a strength she had never fully realized until the fight had tested every fiber of her being. As the sun set, casting long shadows over Blackwater, Clara's gaze lingered on the horizon. The frontier was still wild, still dangerous, but she had faced it. And she had won, side by side with Daniel. She knew that whatever came next, she would meet it with courage, determination, and the fire of a woman who had survived it all. The story of fear, survival, and love had reached a climax, but the whispers of the wind across the plains hinted at more challenges, more tests of will. But Clara Whitmore, the widow who refused a bow, would always endure.